Let's stop that. Or I can. Pause. All right. Well, I think we're ready to get started here. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. My name is Margaret Stern, and I'm the Communications and Program Director for the Susitna River Coalition. And this is our second Winter Speaker Series event of the season. And we're here with Alex Strawn, the Planning Director for the Mat-Su Borough, who's going to speak to us about the Waterbody Setback Ordinance, which he has been super integral in driving. Before I pass over the mic to Alex, I'm going to give him a little bit of an introduction. So Alex Strawn is a lifelong Alaskan, and he serves, like I said before, as the planning director for the Mat-Su Borough. And Alex finds it an honor and privilege to serve his community in which he was raised, and he takes pride in his contribution toward ensuring the Mat-Su Borough has access to parks, trails, clean air, clean water, schools, and emergency services. And safe transportation systems and all the other services that taxpayers come to expect from their local government. I'm really excited that he's here to talk about the Waterbody Setback Ordinance tonight. This has been a topic that Susitna River Coalition has been monitoring for, I think, almost 2 years now since it was first introduced to the Borough Assembly. So I'm really excited to hear about all of the changes that the advisory board has come up with. So we'll pass over the screen to Alex, and feel free to ask any questions you might have as the presentation is going on, and we'll get those questions answered for you. So thank you so much for being here.
Very good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me to give this presentation to this group. It's good to reach as wide variety of different types of people and organizations as possible. So thank you for this opportunity. This has been a major effort. And I guess really, I do have a presentation. I can pop it up on the screen here in a second, but I do just want to give a little bit of a history of the setbacks within the borough. I mean, this is a 50-year-old law. In 1973, the Borough Assembly adopted regulations for setbacks from rights-of-ways, from lot lines, and from water bodies, and they adopted a 75-foot water body setback. And in 1986, they actually dropped it down to 45 feet. And I'll go ahead and start my presentation here because I think this slide, I do have a slide that touches on this, but let's see if I can get this going. Yeah, so in 1986, they dropped it down to 45 feet. So there's kind of a grandfathering in there for people that were 45 feet or further away during that time. And then in May of 1987, there was a vote of the borough, and overwhelmingly they voted to bring it back to 75 feet. And that's where it's been ever since, is 75 feet. There are some sort of shortcomings to the way the regulations are written. One of the big ones being that if you have lakefront property, you can essentially pave the entire thing without any sort of permitting from the borough or any regulations. The ordinance only applies to habitable dwellings. So if you have commercial properties or something other than a residence where you're actually living or have independent living facilities, then this ordinance does not apply. So restaurants or breweries or whatever it may be can go closer than 75 feet. That has been not a very well-known thing. So what has actually happened, unfortunately, is that when businesses want to go on, position themselves on a lakefront, they actually put their building 75 feet back, and they put their parking area closer to the water body. So there's a lot of like non-point source pollution that is going into the water bodies associated with those developments. There's also a lot of instances where people have fuel tanks and things like that that are closer than 75 feet. In Big Lake in particular, there's a lot of homes that have fuel tanks right next to the water's edge so they can fill it in the winter. This has resulted in these tanks leaking out and contaminating the water bodies. So our ordinance is, it is a good thing that we are visiting it. And I can say that the reason why this whole thing started was a couple of years ago, Assembly Member 2 approached the planning department and asked that the setbacks be repealed altogether, that we have 0 feet from water bodies. And so that ordinance was prepared and went to the planning commission and to the assembly, and it was met with a lot of resistance. And so Assemblymember Yunt, who's no longer Assembly member, wanted to create a compromise. So I ended up writing an ordinance that allowed homes that were built closer than 75 feet to have sort of a path to compliance where they would hire an engineer and ensure that they would do provisions such as bioswales or rain gardens or riparian buffer that would treat and retain all of the water associated, all the runoff associated with the development. And in exchange, they would sort of have a path to compliance. As part of this process, we did an analysis of homes along water bodies that were built closer than 75 feet between 1987 and present. And we found that there's about somewhere around 750 homes that are built out of compliance. So there has been issues with lack of enforcement, large part because we really don't know what's going on in the landscape. We don't have any sort of permitting process for that's required if you're going to develop a home or anything like that. So there's been a lot of homes that have gone in closer than 75 feet from the water body. And that number reflects only lakes, not rivers. We don't have a good way of telling how many homes are built closer than 75 feet from rivers. I will say that number 750 really has to be taken with a grain of salt. We used LiDAR data, so we have break lines for water bodies, we have building footprints, and then we have a year built date associated with our assessments data. And we took all 3 of those data sets and came up with that sort of estimate of amount of structures that are built too close to a water body. The reason why I say take it with a grain of salt is because our assessments data is a one-to-many relationship where you may have multiple structures on a lot, but we only have one date for a year built. It's associated with the parcel and not with the structure itself. So there are times where there may be not an illegal structure on that property that is counted, or vice versa. So, but it is recognized that there are many homes that have been built illegally and are not eligible for our financing. And the intent was to come up with a way that we can actually help these homeowners out, but also to protect water quality. So it went to the assembly, and there was still a lot of resistance to this. And so the Waterbody Setback Advisory Board was formed. And here's the number of homes that we found through our analysis, our GIS analysis. And this slideshow is available online. So you're welcome to download this and review these slides for yourself. So the Waterbody Setback Advisory Board was formed. It is an 11-person board, and we had 2 engineers. We had a person from the Planning Commission, person from Fish and Wildlife Commission, Salmon Habitat Partnership. We had a real estate agent and some members at large, and they met. Oh,
can I stop you really quick? I don't think your slides are showing up for
oh,
folks.
it's not. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, I didn't share my
you.
screen. I apologize.
Oh no, that's
Oh,
fine.
okay, I'm glad you said something. That's good. Thank you for that.
Oh, always tricky with Zoom.
Yeah. Okay, and I will say that if anybody has questions along the way, I actually really appreciate when there are questions along the way. I don't mind if the conversations happens organically, and we can meander through the presentation. So
I don't think, are your slides?
it's
Still not showing up.
Well, let's see here.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Darn. Okay, so I will start back at the beginning here. So this is a slide showing sort of who is eligible for grandfather rights, who is legal, and who is illegal based on our regulations and the changes that happened in that 1987 timeframe. And then is a kind of a simplified version of how we determine whether people have grandfather rights. And then, let's see. So here is the, based on our GIS analysis, this is the number of homes that are either eligible for grandfather rights or are just illegal based on our regulations and who's eligible. You can see that just fine?
Looks great.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yes, and then here is the makeup of the Waterbody Setback Advisory Board. This board was selected. So the people on this board were selected by the Mayor DeVries, and then ultimately confirmed by the Assembly. So this is an official borough board where they use Robert's Rules of Order to deliberate. And so we met 18 times. Most of the meetings were 3 hours long. Some of them were 2 hours, but generally they were 3 hours long. The first several meetings were just establishing the base information they needed to make decisions. We did a thorough review of 5 different sections of code. We had engineers come speak to us who specialized in stormwater management and building the infrastructure needed to protect stormwater. We had people from the financial institutions come and speak to us. We had the DEC come speak to us. The borough attorney. We talked about many different topics, code compliance. In 1998, we hired a firm to do an analysis of our setbacks, and we reviewed that document. And I will just summarize that setback analysis was really interesting. They essentially said that in some cases you can have less than 75 feet setback and protect water quality just fine. In other places, you might want to have more than 75 feet. And so it suggested that we take a more nuanced approach than just a plain 75-foot setback for all properties. That advice was not followed, but it definitely came in handy for us to sort of figure out, whether we should allow some homes to go closer or not. So we covered all these topics, and then they rolled their sleeves up and through the process created essentially a 25-page ordinance and a resolution making recommendations to the Assembly. And after all these meetings, they came up with a product and said they wanted me to send it out to the public and community councils and garner feedback, give them 2 months of public comment period where they will then take the feedback, incorporate it into the recommendations, and then they'll go back to the Assembly either February or March and present to the Assembly what the recommendations are. So just diving into what they actually recommended. And I will say, so the ordinance is available on our website, and I'll show you where the website is here in a bit. It is in ordinance format, so it's a lot to digest, and the language that is being added is bold and underlined, and the language that is being deleted is it's all caps and it's in brackets. And so you kind of have to take what's existing in code and compare it to this document that has language being added and subtracted. And it does touch 5 different sections of code. The primary one being 17.55, which is our setback code, but it also does touch 17.80, which is our non-conforming use code. and it touches definitions, which is 17.125. It expands 17.02, which is our mandatory land use permit. And there's one other in there that it touches, which is variances, which is 17.65. So you kind of have to, in order to really understand this thing, you have to pull up all 5 sections of code and see what's being added and deleted. So anybody who actually is able to pour into this and give meaningful comments, I applaud you, because it's a lot. But I will also say that if you review these recommendations and you really like it, please do not give me credit, or do not give me credit. I was a non-voting member. I was there to bring everybody together, to facilitate the process, and to establish guardrails from a legal perspective and from enforcement, like realistic enforcement perspective, and provide them the information they needed. It really was the board members who made all of these decisions. Also, if you don't like it, I ask the same, that you you not give me credit for that either. So diving into what this ordinance actually does. First of all, they adopted a resolution that had recommendations that sort of summarized the ordinance. And then they say that we also recommend this ordinance that is attached to the resolution. So homes that were built between 1987 and present being the date this ordinance is adopted, will have a path to become legal as long as they are not built closer than 45 feet. So people who are built closer than 45 feet are currently illegal, have always been illegal, and will remain illegal if this ordinance is adopted. But they do have to hire an engineer, and certain standards apply. So the engineer has to treat and retain all of the stormwater associated with that development, the runoff. There is certain, so within 25 feet of the water body, 50% of the vegetation has to be maintained. So there is a riparian buffer standard in the first 25 feet, and that's 50% of the shoreline. There is a cap on impervious surfaces, so 20% is the maximum amount of impervious surface that can be retained, or it can be established. And then so these are the things that the engineer has to sort of design for. They have to oversee the development of it. It has to be built, and then an as-built created to show what was done. And then at that point, we can issue a permit saying that this structure is now legal, that they can then show to their financial institution and get conventional mortgages on. There are general standards that apply if this were to be adopted. So the mandatory land use permit, which right now only applies to buildings within 75 feet of water bodies, it would be expanded to apply to any essentially grade and fill. If you're taking a dozer or an excavator, any sort of mechanized heavy machinery, and moving around, changing the contours of the land that is adjacent to a water body, whether it's a lake or a river, would have to get a land use permit to sort of show what you're going to be doing. And you'd have to demonstrate that there are certain standards being met, that a lot of the same things, the riparian buffer has to be maintained, there are 20% impervious surfaces. And then the other general standards that apply is you can no longer have kennel stables, animal yards, animal waste facilities. We have a lot of dog lots in the borough. We've actually have had a lot of phone calls about people even having dog lots on a frozen lake in the wintertime, or adjacent to lakes. So they'd have to step back dog parks or any sort of stables and kennels and things like that, 75 feet away from a water body. Paved vehicle parking areas could not be within 25 feet of a water body. And if they're going to do it within 75 feet of a water body, it has to be designed in a manner that the water is sort of soaked into the soil before it actually gets to the lake. You can no longer store liquid hazardous substances There's limitations on removal of vegetation. And I will say that these general standards apply really within 25 feet of a water body. So I need to adjust this slide a little bit. I apologize about that. Um, uh, so no application of fertilizers or pesticides, and then you can no longer stockpile snow. So if, a lot of times parking lots are being cleared, and snow storage cannot happen within that 25 feet of a water body. And this is very simplified. The ordinance is very detailed about what applies at 25 feet and 75 feet. And so as you dive into that, you'll see how it all relates. Now, a big one is petroleum storage tanks. I mentioned that before. Apparently, there have been a lot of cases where people are actually stealing fuel oil, where they will pull up with their vehicle that has a fuel tank in the back of it. They'll cut the line, dump it, whatever they can fit into their tank in the back of their truck, and then just let the rest of it drain out. There's also cases where just unintentional leakage results in entire fuel tanks leaking out, which can be pretty devastating on a water body. And so not only can you can no longer have fuel tanks within 75 feet of a water body, but if you do have a fuel tank within 75 feet of a water body, it has to be retrofitted. That people are given 5 years to retrofit them to have secondary containment of 110% of the amount of fuel that can be stored in that tank, or they can opt to do a non-gravity fed system with some protection so that they can't possibly leak out if the line is cut or is damaged. And then the setback, the 75-foot setback rule will, if this ordinance was to be adopted, would apply to more than just habitable structures. It would apply to industrial, commercial buildings, or any sort of structure other than the things that are specifically exempt, like boathouses and docks, piers, marinas, things like that. Those would still remain exempt. But if new ones were to be built, then they would have to get a permit. And some of these standards would then apply, such as the riparian buffer standard.
So there is a question about impervious surfaces, and I'm gonna let Dave, would you be willing to elaborate on that a little bit? I think I'm gonna allow you to talk here.
Sure. Hey, Alex, Dave Musgrave here. Hey,
Hi there.
can you say a little bit more about what an impervious surface is and how it fits into the regulations in general?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So, we did create a definition of impervious surface, and generally it is, and I will say that, the devil's in the details, and when we actually go to enforce things is when it really matters how it's defined. But we did make an attempt at defining what an impervious surface is, and it's just generally ground that is, or not necessarily ground. So buildings obviously are impervious, asphalt, things that essentially do not allow for water to be permeated. And so within this, and I need to check with whether it's 75 or 25 feet, but within definitely within 75 feet and potentially just within 25 feet, there's a maximum impervious surface of 20%. So essentially we would calculate the area within that area. So to calculate all the area that is encumbered by driveways, by buildings, pavilions, or whatever it may be, and it can't equal more than 20% of the total land mass in that area. And yeah, and that's like a hard rule. You can't exceed that. So if they do exceed that, they'd have to somehow retrofit in order to make it not equal more than 20%. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And just a follow-up question. Let's see. Does the proposed ordinance include small streams? I mean, really small streams or big rivers, or how do you define a water body?
Yeah, so water body has already been defined in code for a long time, and essentially, um, it's the ordinary high water mark of a water body, which can be determined where that line is. Generally, it's going to be some sort of professional that can make that determination, but it's going to be where um, usually there's a line where the soil changes, where the ordinary high water mark is that you can see. And then there's also where the primary organisms growing in that water body are aquatic and not terrestrial in nature. So there is a pretty solid definition that's been in code for the past 50 years or so for what constitutes a water body. So yes, most even little streams, if they are year-round, will likely be subject to these 75-foot water body setback. There are some ephemeral streams that dry out in the summer where the organisms living there are not aquatic and they're not considered a water body.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
and just the exceptions to the rule for boat houses and docks and so forth, that seems to me that it sort of creates a two-tiered system, those who have and those who haven't. And I guess my comment is I just find that a little concerning.
Do you mean for people who have docks already versus people who are going to build docks?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, understand. So
No, I guess I mean for those people who would build in the future versus those people who are near water bodies of water that like a salmon stream, but aren't going to be putting they're limited by the same ordinance, but the people of the boathouses are given a pass.
yeah, well, that exemption has been in place for quite some time. I think it's like 1988 is when they put the exemption in for these different structures.
Oh yeah, I know that. I just it's just it does create a two-tiered system.
Yeah, and we kind of already have that, right? Like we have some
Yeah.
homes that are allowed to be within 75 feet because they're issued grandfather rights, and some that aren't. So
Right.
yeah, that's the nature. Whenever you change the law, you create a new set of grandfathered developments. That's part of it.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Alex.
Yeah.
And then we have an attendee saying the definition of an impervious draft in the impervious in the draft ordinance is impervious surface means the area of the subject site covered by impenetrable materials, and this surface has been compacted or covered with a layer of material so that it is highly resistant to infiltration by water. Thank you for dropping that into the chat. And then we have another question, if you're willing to take another one right now, Alex. Great. It says that there must be the establishment of a riparian buffer, but it doesn't state the amount of footage it must be. So is there a distance?
It's 50% of the shoreline.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And so riparian's listed a couple times in there. So if you did a search for riparian, it's in there a couple times. It definitely says 50% of the shoreline. So that's in there.
Great. And then I have another question with regard to homes built between 85 and 87 when the setback was temporarily set at 45 feet. And so is that a good time for a question about that?
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Well, okay, Patricia, if you have your question, feel free to ask it.
Yeah, Alex, this is Patty Fisher here.
Hi, Patty.
Hi. For those of us that have a home built 85, 86, the way I'm reading all of this is that we're, legally non-conforming.
Yeah, that's another way to say grandfather rights.
Okay, and so I do not have to go out and get any kind of land permit.
For what you have existing?
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. So May 12, 1987 is the magic date. That's when the election was certified. So the way the code reads is you essentially have pre-existing legal non-conforming status. But if you want a piece of paper that says that you have it, you have to fill out a form and sort of demonstrate that you were built during that time. We do a lot of the legwork ourselves, where we go through our assessments data and old imagery and different things like that. And if we can demonstrate that you were built prior to May 12, 1987, then we will issue you pre-existing legal non-conforming status. Now that is voided if you expand the building in any way, height, width, or depth. If you
Right.
haven't expanded it, then you should be eligible.
Yeah, no expansion. Okay, well, I didn't realize that I had to come in and get some kind of form. Thank
Yep.
you.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you for your question. And we actually have a couple more.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bring it on.
this is a hot topic. Okay, so Laura is asking again, so 50% of the shoreline, meaning like along the lake, she's curious how deep that buffer must be. And if there is a 75% setback, then 50% of that must be riparian. How is that?
Yeah. So.
And if we get into that later, then.
Yeah. So it is 25 feet. So
Okay.
for that first 25 feet, then 50% of the vegetation along that 25 feet has to be maintained. And sorry if I'm just going to pull up the ordinance real quick, just so that I can be sure I'm giving you the right answer. Now, is there a second part of that question?
I am not sure. Laura, do you have more to that? I know she doesn't want to, she's going to type it into the chat. And then it looks like Dave has another question as well.
Okay, great.
I'll let him ask while you're finding that.
Yeah.
You answered mine already.
Okay, great. Sorry. Had your hand up, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay, Laura says that there is not a follow-up to that. There's no second part.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so that is the answer. So let's see if I can get back this last slide. Are there any other questions? Because I can't see the questions when I'm.
Oh yeah, it's great. No, there are no questions right now, so we can move on, and then we'll come to another stopping point for some more.
Okay, great. And this is basically my last slide here. So
okay.
yeah. So they did recommend, because this has gone largely unenforced for a long time, and there's different reasons. First of all, we don't know what's going on in the landscape because of our sort of lack of permitting. But another reason really is if somebody builds a home, or if they have any sort of violation of code, usually we are going to enforce with the intent of finding a remedy for the violation. And when somebody builds a home next to a water body, what is the remedy? It can be you move the home, which is often not a very good option for people, not a feasible option. You can take a saw and cut off part of your home. We have seen people get permits from the Army Corps to fill in a portion of a lake to become compliant. We've seen people divert rivers in order to be compliant. So that is also one reason that this has not been largely enforced. There has not been the political will to have people either move or demolish or modify their home. So what they really wanted was an early detection system. So they recommended that we hire essentially a person solely dedicated to monitoring water bodies, looking, at least in the summer months or whatever, looking for new construction along water bodies and reporting that, and so that enforcement activities can happen before the home is built. Because often when we find out that there is a home built on the edge of a water body, then it's already been built and there's not a great remedy. So if we can catch them when they're doing the dirt work is when we want to catch them and work with them to come into compliance. So they did make that recommendation. Another thing is a limitation on variances. So a variance, it's covered under 17.65 of our code, and it essentially is a pressure relief valve. If you have a lot of variances were granted on Big Lake, frankly, because there was it's a lot of older subdivisions that don't have our minimum 40,000 square feet. So you have a smaller subdivision or a smaller lot that's maybe a quarter acre in size, a sandwich between a water body and a right of way, and it really leaves no buildable room for a home. And the way our code reads is you can build a home closer than 75 feet to the extent that property owners in the surrounding area are enjoying homes. So if there's the surrounding area has a bunch of little tiny cabins, then you can basically build a little cabin on your property that's closer than 75 feet. If everybody around you has big, very large houses, then you actually would have the right to build a very large house, even if it's closer than 75 feet of a water body. So the recommendation from the board is that variances be limited to not allow any variance within 45 feet of a water body, period. And then if a home is going to seek a variance within 75 feet and further away than 45 feet, then they have to go through this process of hiring engineer and doing design to ensure that the storm or that all the runoff is treated and retained, that they have the riparian buffers and impervious surface cap and all these different things. So that is a change to 17.65 that they recommended. And then they also finally recommended that they didn't go into depth about this, but they did recommend that the Borough Assembly explore habitat protection tax incentive, which I learned about this along the way. The state of Alaska has specific rules that allow municipalities to provide tax incentives for people who invest in habitat protection on the shoreline. So some of these changes that are required by this code could be people make the investment and make the improvements to their property to protect the water quality, and then they can apply over time to have tax breaks to recoup some of that money that they invested in that. So that, I believe, is the end of my presentation, other than this is being pushed out. January 13th is no longer the comment period. It would be 60 days from today, whatever that is. And I'll pull up our website so that you can see what the web page looks like. And it did, like I said, go out to all the different community councils. This presentation is on there. You can click on review public comment draft. So that would download the resolution and the attached ordinance. We did already change it January 21st, 2025. You can email msb.planning@matsu.gov.us. There's also a button at the top left that says submit a public opinion message, which would essentially auto-generate an email that you could fill out and send to the planning department. And then, as always, you can always give me a call. My phone number's on there. And if you have questions or comments that you want to make just by speaking to me about it. This webpage has all of our, if you go to our, let's see, click that middle button that says agendas, packets, and minutes. It has all the recordings of all the meetings and minutes and everything like that we've had. So you're welcome to peruse around that and figure out how we actually got to this point. So yeah, I guess with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. We have Mike Bronson, who says, thank you so much for your serious thought and your engineering approach to water body protections. It's so important, and also appreciate more serious compliance monitoring. So thank you, Mike. And then an anonymous person says, does a land use permit give legal non-conforming status for those homes that are 45 feet or more from a lake?
Well, so if So that's an interesting question. So it's a little bit different than legal nonconforming status, but it's very similar. If somebody is built between 45 and 75 feet of a lake, and this does not apply to rivers, by the way, that's an important point, and they're built after 1987, then, and if they hire an engineer and they go through this process and they meet all the standards, then they would be given like basically a certificate that says that this permit has been issued, and it sort of signifies that that property is legal based on the as-built that they submitted. And then another important point that I get this question a lot, those homeowners would then be responsible for maintaining the structures or facilities that were installed. So if somebody installed a bioswale, they would be responsible for ensuring that if over time that may fill up with sediment or whatever it may be, they would have to keep those and maintain those and not fill them in.
Okay, great. And then just moving forward, what are the next steps for this process? So people are commenting, and then what happens after that, and how will all of this come to conclusion?
Well, thank you for asking that question. So 60-day review, and then all these comments will be compiled and presented to the Waterbody Setback Advisory Board, who would then meet however times they need to meet to come up with their final recommendation to the Assembly. The way the ordinance is that created that board is the chair of the board would then present to the Assembly their findings. We do a written report and a verbal presentation to the Assembly with their recommendations. At that point, then it is up to the Assembly what they want to do. And so it would require that either the Assembly as a whole vote to bring that back in some form or another, or any one or multiple Assembly members can champion an ordinance. And then at that point, whatever version of the ordinance they want to bring forward, we would send it to the Planning Commission for 90-day review. There'd be a public hearing, and then it would go to the Assembly where there'd be another public hearing. So this is the very beginning of the public process.
Wow.
And,
So there are 3 or 4 more opportunities to engage with this process for the public.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And
That
so
leads-
and then what kind of comments are helpful in this process?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So, this is a large and technical document, and there's probably some errors in there or inconsistencies. We certainly welcome that. Suggestions for formatting, suggestions for content. If it's unclear in any way, or even if you disagree with one of the provisions in there, an explanation of why you disagree with it. I mean, I think any and all comments are going to be useful. Other than I just don't like this period, that might not be very useful. But even that is a point for the board to consider. So yeah, I think surely there's room for improvement, and we welcome the feedback.
Great. Yeah, well, it's been really remarkable. I know the advisory board and yourself have put in so many hours into this process, and it is really exciting to see it moving forward. And I do see that Kendra is on here. I don't know if she would like to say something about this process. Is she still in there? Kendra, I'm just going to pull you up if you want to say something, if you're okay with that. You don't have to either, but I just know she's been super involved in this whole process and saw her on here, so just thought I would invite her on to. Hey, Kendra. Maybe not, but and I also see there is a guest that has something to say, that has their hand raised, so I will allow you to talk. 907-733-1656. If you'd like to unmute and say something.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Becky.
Yes. Hi, this is Becky. Yeah, I just wanted to know, what are the chances that the Assembly is going to go for this? I mean, this is a remarkable document, and I'm all for it. And I just was wondering, what are our chances? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think that's very difficult to predict. You know, yeah, I really don't know the answer to that. And if I had a guess, I probably wouldn't say it out loud. So I hate to say it. I really don't know. You know, this is a board that was formed by this assembly. So that definitely, I think they'll definitely take this recommendation seriously. But whether or not it's going to pass, I have no idea.
Sorry, Becky, I'll move you back on to allow to talk. If you have a response, you can unmute.
Oh no, no big deal. I was just curious. I was just, back here thinking this is a great document, and I hope that it will get some traction. And if they don't vote it and they don't vote it down, we have it to for the future to pursue, because we're certainly going to need it with the Mat-Su Borough growing as rapidly as it's growing. So I really give kudos to everybody who worked on it, to the board, and to you yourself. It's been a long time coming, but also it's been a long process for you all, and it's just awesome. So we'll just have to see what happens, and I hope we get good public comment.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree. It's been amazing again to kind of pop in and out of those meetings, and all of the substantive conversation that has happened, and just the heart and soul all the advisory board has put into this has been really, really amazing to see, and pretty inspiring, actually. So yeah.
I will say that I was pleasantly surprised at how well the board got up to speed. It was a lot of information to soak in, and they really obviously put in the time, not just in the meetings, but outside the meetings, to really understand the topics, and to be able to use Robert's Rules of Order to actually produce this document is really impressive that the board was able to do that. So kudos to everybody who was on the board.
Yeah. Well, does anybody have any final questions for Alex? Oh, I see another hand went up. Maybe nope, went back down. Well, I just wanted to say as well that Sioux River Coalition will be putting out some talking points on this and what it means for landowners that are in compliance and out of compliance, kind of a summary. And I see John has a comment. So here, John, I'll move you to talking mode. All right, John, you can unmute if you like. John,
Okay.
would you like to?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sure. I just want to say to Alex that I know you care a lot about this, and I think that you've done a very, very good job in coming up with a fair legislation and regulation for the water. And I also basically, it was a tough thing. You balanced a lot of competing interests, and I think that you've done a pretty darn good job of doing that, and at the same time protecting our water. And that's all. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, John. I will say, I will take credit for facilitating the process, informing the board and giving them the information they needed, but really all credit should go to the board. They are the ones who made the difficult decisions, and it got heated sometimes, but they all kind of worked through all the issues and were able to come up with pretty much unanimous agreement for most of the things in this ordinance. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, in any event, I appreciate your efforts. So
thank you.
Thanks, John. Well, once again, any final questions? And we'll be sending out to folks that registered for this. I will make sure to send a follow-up email with information and how to comment. And that will also all be going out in the Susitna River Coalition emails coming up throughout this process. And creating again some documents for what this means for landowners. And oh, we have another Alstron. I'll let you come up. You can unmute and speak if you like.
Oh, hi. I was just asking Alex if he was going to come over for Thanksgiving dinner.
Sorry.
The answer is yes, of course.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Al. Good to get family on there. And is there anything else that you would like to add, Alex, before we kind of close out for the night?
Yeah, no, well, so, I mean, I guess I would just say that, you know, I really always am amazed at when I go to different community councils or groups like this, the amount of energy that people put in that is often thankless, and you know, it doesn't pay well, and you know, but it certainly makes a difference in the community. So I really appreciate whatever side of the issues you fall on, for you to review what we're putting out there to hold the government accountable, both in this part of the process as well as like when the public meetings start. It is very much appreciated, and it does make a difference. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here this evening. We'll send out information on how to comment and how to get more involved in this whole process, which sounds like, again, I thought, you know, you guys were pretty much, it sounds like there are a lot more opportunities to comment, which is awesome. And this will be a much longer process. And thank you again for being here and sharing the work that you've been doing.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I just also would like to say, I wanted to thank the Jessica Stevens Community Foundation for helping make these winter speaker events possible. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, or if you have any ideas for other fun speaker events about life in the Susitna watershed, I'm always excited to hear your ideas. So thank you so much for being here this evening, and thank you, Alex, for coming and sharing all of your work with our community.
Thank you. Take care.
Great. Have a great night, everyone.